Hello, today in the studio we have Teresa Young, who is the niece of John Bradburne, the Englishman who was martyred in Africa in 1979. Teresa, welcome to the EWTN studios here in Walsingham.
Thank you very much.
John Bradburne is a name known to some, but not to all. He was born in 1922 in England, and he died in Zimbabwe, or then Rhodesia, in 1979, and he died a violent death. How would you sum up his life?
Well, he was searching, always looking, searching for God. So he was always on the move. He was sort of just one place to the next. So that would be until he finally reached his place.
Now that search entails two continents, Europe and Africa. And he's a kind of modern day Joseph Labouré almost, in Europe anyway, because he drifts from pillar to post, from county to county, to London, and then he drifts around Europe before ending up in southern Africa and then Rhodesia, where he comes to a particular place in Africa, which is to be his destiny, to be his home. Where was that?
Well, he landed finally, the last 10 years of his life, at a place called Mutemwa, which was a place for leprosy, people living with leprosy. And a friend of his took him out there, Heather Benoy. And Heather had heard about this place and said, "John, shall we go and take a look?" And so they went together. And as soon as John went there, they were both actually horrified at the situation that they found there.
What did they find?
Oh, gosh. Well, people suffering, people uncared for, people sick, people grubby, hungry, just almost abandoned in a way, not just physically but spiritually. And it was awful.
And all suffering from leprosy?
Leprosy, I believe so. I mean, there may have been some that were, homeless or whatever, I don't know at that time. But it was a place for leprosy. Mutemwa, which is a big granite rock, across the valley. You got Chigona, then you got the settlement, and then across there you got Mutemwa Mountain, and that's called You Are Cut Off. And leprosy patients would come from all over Africa, Malawi, Mozambique. They used to be huge at that granite Mutemwa. And then it sort of got smaller, and it ended up this little community right below Chigona.
So this sort of mountain, this kind of mound, was a kind of leper colony for many years.
Yes, it was a leper colony, as they called it then.
Yeah.
Yes.
And by the time John arrived, it had sort of become a kind of an institutional place to leave lepers. Is that? And I use the word leave deliberately. It was a kind of discarding of the lepers.
Yeah.
So what do you think attracted John to that particular place and those people?
Yes, I think, seeing human beings absolutely at the rock bottom. And it was very distressing. And in fact, and yet, even though it was very distressing, he knew he had to be there. He knew he had landed in his special place. And yet he knew that this is not going to be easy. So he even said to Heather, "Benoy, I've got to be here." But what was in that is that, oh gosh, I've got to do this. It was like I have to do it.
Now, you're the niece of John Bradburne. Was your mother related to him? Was it your mother?
John had 4 other siblings. John was in the middle. You had the oldest son, Philip, and then he had 2 sisters on either side. So there was Philip, Mary, John, my mother Audrey, and then the youngest, Michael.
Right. Yeah. And what sort of background did they have? They were an English family?
Yes, they were. My grandfather was an Anglican vicar. And they were all born in Skerwith in Cumberland, or Cumbria now. And so that's, except for Mike. Michael was born here in Norfolk. So they started off in Cumberland, in Skerwith, and then they came over here. And he went to Tilney All Saints to start with.
Which is where, approximately?
Tilney All Saints it's in Norfolk, but they didn't like it there very much. They weren't happy there. They weren't there long.
Mm-hmm.
Then the vicarage there, they weren't comfortable at all. They thought it was haunted and, you know, all that sort of stuff. And it didn't feel good.
Mm.
Anyway, Fist as my grandfather, Fist and Mist, John called them, then moved to Causton, which is here.
It's about half an hour's drive from Walsingham.
Yeah, it's not far. And they loved it there. So John and my mother and Michael was born there. They all grew up here.
It's quite incredible, really, the way in which you've come to Walsingham to speak about John, and we are surrounded by John's family geography in this area.
Yes.
But also, I believe, because John, as well as being a great, for all the things he did, he was also a poet.
Yes, he
certainly
was.
And I believe in his poetry. I think you mentioned to me before we came on air that he references Walsingham in his poetry.
Yes, I think it's mentioned. I think so. We'll have to ask Professor David Crystal. He's the fundi on that. And David has done so many of his books. You know, all his poetry, you know, a lot of this is David Crystal has spent so many hours gathering it all together and sorting it out.
Mm-hmm.
So
he doesn't really follow a traditional route in terms of life. I mean, and you're laughing because it's probably the word traditional and John don't really go together. He's one of the most unorthodox Englishmen of his generation, probably, and probably didn't quite fit in. Would you say?
That's true.
So what happened? He went to school, and then what did he do?
Well, I think after school, I think the war was coming out.
Yeah.
And he became a Gurkha and joined up, I think his brother Philip and he went out, I think to India. I can't remember the facts exactly. It's all in that book, Didier Runce's book. All the facts are there. But they went out to Burma, and he was a Gurkha, and Father John Dove, a Jesuit priest, and he became such good friends.
That's right. Teresa, then after the war, I mean, again, he drifts around England. He tries his vocation in a number of religious establishments. Nothing works out. I think he tries his vocation on the continent as well, with religious communities of varying... I believe he even tried his vocation with the Carthusians.
Yeah.
And by this stage, John had moved from his family Anglicanism to Catholicism.
Yeah.
What were the chief driving forces behind that conversion, do you think?
Oh gosh, I don't know. He had such a devotion to Our Lady.
Mm-hmm.
And
St. Francis, I guess, as well.
And of course St. Francis of Assisi. And so he was just being led in that direction. And it was not easy having an Anglican vicar as your father. And I think it took him a long time to come to terms with it. In fact, a long time. But when they retired from here, from Norfolk, my grandparents, Miss Erica and Thomas Bradburn, they moved to Devon. And they went and lived in Ottery St. Mary to retire. But there was a little Catholic church, St. Anthony's, in Ottery. And John would just go and it was very near Buckfast Abbey as well. Mm. So I think he was received into the church down in the crypt at Buckfast.
Mm. There was always an element, though, that his religion wasn't the norm. It was always kind of, it was almost like a sort of figure from the Old Testament or something. Yes. There was always extremes. There was always, like even testing his vocation in the Carthusians, or, there was nothing sort of ordinary about John, and he didn't fit the ordinary, but there was nothing about his path. It was all or nothing with him. And maybe his contemporaries, those that knew him, weren't that surprised that he ended up in a leper colony in then Rhodesia. Was that true?
Well, I think some of them thought he was dotty. They thought, this guy's nuts. I don't know. But I know that my mother stuck with him. And of course his mother, my grandmother, Misty, she was a beautiful human being. Wonderful woman. I think he had a bit of clashings with his father because they just didn't agree on things. But Mist was just beautiful. And... I think he was such a free spirit. He didn't land somewhere for long, and then he was on off. You talk about him, being on his own. He took a vow to Our Lady. He married Our Lady. He took a vow. That's it. You are my queen. And, it went from there, and he was more interested. And the closer he got to God, that's all it was about. It was just about God and love, really, and caring for those at the very bottom. And those people, grew to love him so much that he became Baba John, Father John.
Now, the Rhodesia that John was living in was one with a lot of political turmoil, which ultimately ended up in a rather vicious war. And so the final years that John was living there were times not just of great deprivation, but also great danger.
Yeah. It doesn't worry about that.
No, but it ultimately claimed his life.
Yeah, but it didn't matter. He's there, focused on God, and focused on that flock that needed that.
Tell us a little bit about his death.
Well, gosh, before he died, he was, people said, John, you better get out of here. You're going to get taken out. And he just wouldn't go. He wouldn't leave them. And even Father Fidelis was saying that when he took him back the last time he saw him, he said, if I take you away, he said, don't matter about that, I'll just walk back. He wasn't going to leave his friends. I mean, what greater thing to risk your own life and ultimately you die for your friends. It didn't worry him. I understand that. It doesn't matter anymore. The closer you get to God, this life doesn't matter. You just focus on the one. Nothing else matters. Dying doesn't matter. What do you do when you die? You cross over to eternal life with God. No big deal.
But the actual killing of John was a very brutal and a very bloody affair, and it must have been a very, very, even for somebody like John, must have been an absolutely terrifying and horrible experience.
Yes, I think so, in that, but I think what probably got him through was prayer. I mean, they abducted him in the night, and they took him off into the Bundu and towards Gwaze, which is where there are some caves, to go and interrogate him, to see what do we do with this guy. And so he had that long walk. He was taken. It's all so Christ-like, in a way. So Christ gets taken, he goes through, and you have the agony of what's coming. And so, John was marched off. He was taken off, and he didn't know what was going to happen to him. And they tortured him and tormented him, when, that first stop that he had, and, people were horrid to him, mocking him. Well, not, it was dreadful. And so then they marched on, they got to Gwaze. And so he just went with the flow. He just knew that was his path, his journey. And he met Anna Gwaze, the daughter of the chief of Gwaze, on the way. And John had stopped to rest, and he was sitting down, and Anna came down the path, and he said hello, and he greeted her, and would you like to pray? So she said, yes, let's pray. So they prayed together at that spot where John was resting, which was very near the caves. And then they was taken off to the caves, and in the end they decided, look, don't you do this, don't you spill this man's blood here. Anyway, they took him back to the main road, and the Mujibas that thought that he'd seen too much, and it was going to be too risky that he's alive, and they shot him. And so, you know what, you say the actual end was quick. Some people suffer for years, suffering, dying. John's was quick, really. Although his life before was a searching. There's a sort of a suffering in not knowing. There's the cloud of unknowing, really. But the actual death, dead, gone.
Do you think, was it one of John's desires to die a martyr death?
Yes, definitely. He wanted to be buried in his Franciscan, die a martyr, work with lepers, and be buried in the Franciscan habit.
Well, he certainly worked with lepers, and he certainly died a martyr for the faith.
Yeah.
What about the Franciscan habit?
Well, he was given, he was Third Order of St. Francis, and somebody gave him a habit, said, you deserve this, come on, this is for you. So that he became that. And he was so like St. Francis. And then, I don't know, at his funeral, the coffin was brought in, placed up by the altar in the Salisbury Cathedral, as it was called then. And not long before, Dr. Louisa, who was a great friend, had been killed. And so there's a picture of him taking Louisa's coffin in, and now it's John's turn. John's coffin was up at the front. And they were having a requiem mass for him. Lots of priests there and friends, and a dear friend of John's, Anne Lander, asked for some lilies to be placed on his coffin, and 3 in 1 for the Trinity, because he had a great devotion for the Trinity and Our Lady. And as that was placed on the coffin, there were 3 drops of blood that dripped from underneath, which was seen by many people.
Yes, indeed.
And so after the service, they took the coffin out back, and they'd opened it up. And one person there, I think it was one of the nuns who knew John, said, well, but he wanted to be buried in his Franciscan habit. What's he doing in that? So they changed it. So he got his 3rd wish.
John died in 1979.
Yeah.
And yet today, sitting here with you, John is a servant of God.
Yes.
Which is a relatively recent development.
Yes, it is.
When was John declared servant of God?
Well, September, on the 5th, for the anniversary.
So the 5th of September...
5th of September is the anniversary.
2019.
Is always the anniversary of his death, and pilgrims, thousands, go to Mutemwa to celebrate that.
Did that local devotion start quite quickly?
Oh, it's been a devotion for a long time.
Yeah.
Long time people have been going to Mutemwa.
Because of John?
Because of John. It was extraordinary to see this European, but living so poorly, and yet being so full of love for those who nobody wants those people. They're afraid of them. They're afraid to catch leprosy. John, no problem, let's go.
And what has been your experience of meeting people whose lives have been touched by John's?
I tell you what, if you go out to Mutemwa on the 5th of September, you go and meet people, but even here at Walsingham. I've been here. About a year ago I came and I saw some African women, and I thought, I bet they're from Zimbabwe. And I went up to say hello. Hi, how are you doing? Where are you from? Well, can you believe it? Blow me down. One of those women, John had actually been to her parents' house to share a meal with them. And here at Walsingham, and you get many Zimbabweans living in the UK now, they come here. So it's like John's alive here at Walsingham, through those Zimbabweans and through Our Lady,
John's devotion to Our Lady is quite touching.
Yeah.
I mean, he said the rosary.
Yes.
I think he said the Vesper, the little office of Our Lady.
Yes.
What do you think? Why do you think he was so devoted to it?
The mother of Jesus Christ. Our mothers are so important to us. If we're lucky to have a beautiful, good mother, and John did. My grandmother, Erica Bradburn, was a beautiful human being. And yet the mother of us all is Our Lady of the world, in my view. And John, John adored her, really.
And then in the decades that followed his death, and books were published about him, how did you feel when you started to read books like Father Dove's, which give his life story in such detail and map it out in a kind of Christian context? I mean, how did you feel as the niece, blood relative of a potential saint, canonized saint? How does that make you feel?
I feel very proud of him, because he was true to himself.
Yeah.
He didn't try and be anybody else. He was totally authentically John. And he was on his way, just let's go. And it didn't matter if he'd made choices that weren't right for him. He was brave. He was fearless. He tried, this one. That didn't stop anyone that he got to and said it's not right. It didn't stop him trying another. So he had a courage about him to keep going forward until he found his place, really, where his ultimate love is, of laying your life down for those who have nothing.
Yes, there is a courage in John's life that he followed his path to the end.
Yeah.
Even though it was a path that few people understood.
Yeah.
And perhaps was criticised, he was criticised greatly by some for it.
Yes.
Maybe seen as self-indulgent or as opting out or not being responsible.
Yeah.
But he kind of, there's a great amount of courage. There's also a great amount of courage, I guess, in living with lepers.
Yeah.
I mean, it must have been, I mean, when we say the word lepers, most of us think of the New Testament.
Yes.
And think of an absolutely incurable illness, a deadly disease.
Yes.
And yet John embraced the leper.
Yeah.
Embraced the lifestyle of the leper. In some ways, would you say that he almost sort of became a leper?
Well, first of all, that word leper, you know, in the old days you'd call leper colony, or leper this, leper that, but now it's people suffering or living with leprosy, rather than labeling someone, oh, they're a leper. It's like someone living with cancer, oh, they're cancer. So I think it's, in this day and age, I think it's kinder to use the word those who are living with leprosy or alongside with leprosy, because they are not that. They're certainly not that.
Yes.
They're children of God, and everyone's special. So that's that about that word. It can stick, although, you know, his whole life, you know, people thought he was a beatnik, they thought he was nuts. So that way, and they thought, oh, don't take him seriously. And he wasn't practical. He was terribly impractical. You know, he wasn't, you know, there's a picture of him pumping water out of a pump in Zimbabwe somewhere, and it's going out of the bucket. It's not even going in the bucket. You know, and even driving, he was terribly impractical. So he'd say, I'll do odd jobs, but they didn't want him to. There was a side in that was totally impractical. And yet he had this deep spirituality, which was more important, really.
Teresa, what would you hope for John in the coming years?
Well, I think, first of all, he needs to be recognized by the church as a martyr, because that's what he was. You know, when you're a martyr, you die. You won't abandon those who you know, his faith and those that he was looking after. So I think, number one, the next step, please, God willing, that he is recognized as the martyr. And from following that, then I think, you know, sainthood, canonization, you know, but there's a process there. You know, so there needs to things that need to happen in that, and testimonies and miracles and that sort of thing. But they've got so many testimonies. They've got so many things that have happened, and they're happening all the time. You go to Mutemwa on the 5th of September, you climb up Chigona and do that all-night vigil. The prayers, the testimonies, the papers that people, you know, I get people saying to me, did you know this, that John, this happened and this was sick and then it was better. You know, so all the testimonies are gathered. So now, because of coronavirus, things had to slow down a little bit with interviewing these people. And so, but hopefully now it needs to pick up, it needs to go. So martyrdom, and then the testimonies, and ultimately to canonize him. And you know, it's not John was really, you know, if you read this in here, that he wrote to Father Dove. I marked it out here, and this is really important to listen to this. It says, pray on for my sanctification too. Now this is a private letter from from my Uncle John to Father John Dove. It's 25th of September, 1952. So he wanted it. He wanted to become a saint, but for this reason, not so much for the glory of John, although as a kid he used to be a little bit like that, but as a mature man it was more for this. Pray on for my sanctification too, because it would encourage so many souls. So encourage so many souls if such a wreckage might come to canonization. And then his humor comes in, and I do so want to bypass purgatory. So it's really to encourage others. And I think that is number one reason for, making John a saint, to encourage others. Let's go forward. Let's all go forward in love for God, the way he was. And let's care for those who do not have anything. So faith, hope and love, the Trinity words signify John, and I think that's let's go forward with that quickly, so it happens in my lifetime and faster. I would like to make one more point, if I may, if that's all right, Evan. We can't do this without support for the John Bradburn Memorial Society. We need support to go forward, to take John's cause forward. So, and that's based here in England, so please support the John Bradburn Memorial Society.
Tell us a little bit about the John Bradburn Memorial Society.
Well, it was started up, you see, in Zimbabwe. They had the trustees who used to, can't remember what it was called, but it was a group of people in Zimbabwe that would help Mutemwa. And then I don't know how it happened, but my cousin Celia Brigstock, who's Mayor's youngest daughter, who became the Catholic, she said, I'm going to help by supporting Mutemwa by creating the John Bradburn Memorial Society. And the purpose of that was to keep supporting those friends of John's, those who are living with leprosy at Mutemwa. Mm-hmm. And that continues today, but it desperately needs, people to support them in what they're doing. And they've got two things running. One, they're supporting Mutemwa and the residents who live there. And the other thing is to support John's cause in going forward.
Because I think it's very important, Teresa, to emphasise to those watching that Mutemwa continues to this day.
Oh yes, very much so.
And you're involved in fundraising for it.
Well, so I do a little bit. We all do what we can. Kate's just done a walk, and I've just done a canoeing paddle and raising money for water storage tanks for Mutemwa because water's so precious. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Teresa, for coming to the studios here in Walsingham. Thank you very much for your testimony about your uncle.
Yeah.
And we pray too that his great sanctity will be recognised by the Church, and that his death will be a witness in these dark times, a witness to hope, to faith, and above all to love.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for coming to the studios and talking about your Uncle John.
Thank you.